Great. So welcome everyone to Now Play This Festival and to our artist conversation with Timothy Snowden, who made Triangulate, and Helen Kwok and Chad Toprak, who made Rainbow Paths. Welcome to all of you. I'm really thrilled to be able to speak with you at the same time because both your works are installed on the River Terrace here at Somerset House right now, and they're also both kind of related in terms of thinking about bodies and how they connect or disconnect, how they see each other in different kinds of spaces. So thanks so much for joining, and thanks also for your amazing contributions to Now Play This remotely. We'll send you a lot of photos and stuff like that. So what we're going to do in this session is first talk a little bit about Rainbow Path by Helen and Chad, and then switch over to Triangulate, speak a little bit with Tim, and then have also a chance for like a shared conversation at the end of the session. So Helen and Chad, maybe you could both talk a little bit about your practices, what kind of games, what kind of art, what kinds of forms of play are you interested in, kind of what do you do when you're not doing Rainbow Paths? Maybe starting with you, Helen, if that's okay.
Yeah, so my name's Helen Kwok. I call myself a multimedia artist and designer, and I work on playful installations, experimental games, and public art activations. Often my work involves play in public and social spaces.
And I'm Chad Toprak. I'm an experimental game designer, independent curator, and up until very recently, I was also the artistic director of the Free Play Independent Games Festival. A lot of the work that I do is also quite, experimental, a lot of installation art, a lot of alternative controller type projects. But also I really enjoy making stuff for public spaces as well. And we also work together as an artist duo. We're a duo in real life as well. But yeah, we've worked together for just over 2 years now, making public art installation work for museums and galleries,
local city councils.
And we mostly exist within the art world with like a games twist or a games context.
Cool, thanks so much. And how did Rainbow Paths come to be as a project? Was that coming from a collaboration with an art organization, or how did you get started?
Did you want to?
Yeah, so Rainbow Paths first came about working with a local city council here in Melbourne called City of Casey. And it was designed for a huge outdoor plaza area at a place called Bunjil Place. It's a huge outdoor plaza. And they wanted to kind of activate that space. And at that time, we were working on another project called Street Tape Games, which was about playing with social distancing. So it had come about at the very start of the pandemic, and we were interested in kind of how people would play in public space during coronavirus times. And so we were doing a lot of work with vinyls and tapes on the ground to create a kind of unique play space that people could kind of use to either make up their own games or play games that we have designed ourselves. So Rainbow Paths is kind of like a sister project to that, except Street Tape Games was a facilitated experience where we had to be there to introduce the games to the public, while Rainbow Paths is kind of like a public art installation that kind of has mini games embedded into the play space. And so it's an ambient form of play. So if the public kind of walks past the installation, sees it, they can just go in and play themselves without us being there. And get these type of games range from kind of noticing the environment, playful prompts that kind of prompt you to do something playful in public space, either with each other or alone. Yeah, and it's kind of like got these paths connecting each of these games, and you kind of have like a branching path scenario, like a choose your own adventure, where you get to choose which path you want to take to play the mini games on the ground.
Yeah, maybe it's good for people who haven't had a chance to go outside onto the river terrace and play it. If you could kind of just walk us through like how a typical player experience would look, like a fictional one.
Yeah, we've got several starting points. So depending on which path you're coming from, you might come across a start point. There's no rule saying that you have to start from there, but it's a good spot. We've got sort of easier games at the starting points, things like walk in slow motion to the next stop. And so it really encourages people to adapt like a playful mindset, I guess. You might come across, the next one might be find these shapes in your surroundings. And so you'd have to find a square, a triangle, a circle, a diamond, or a rectangle. And then if you're playing with a friend, you might start to talk about, which ones you found and where. And then you walk on to the next, and that one might prompt you to spot the tallest tree in the environment, and then it asks you, how old do you think it is? So it's a game, it's like Rainbow Paths is a game that really encourages you to slow down and to begin to sort of observe your environment and become a bit more playful.
Yeah, we've had it installed at quite busy street corners and street kind of intersections here in Melbourne and also in Perth. And this is probably the one at Somerset House is probably our 7th iteration since Rainbow Paths was born. And yeah, we've noticed that a lot of the times when public's kind of passing through is that it does encourage them to just slow down and kind of, rather than trying to get from point A to point B, which is often the case when you're in the city, you're often rushing from one place to another. It actually encourages people to slow down and actually notice their surroundings. And one of the prompts that I really love is about closing your eyes and just listening to 3 sounds in your environment. And that's actually really beautiful to see when people do that. And also
my favorite is probably we've got one that says look up and around. Yes. What do you see? And looking up isn't really something that we're used to when we're in urban city environments, and we begin noticing all sorts of things that we've never seen before when we begin looking up. So that's probably my favorite.
Yeah.
And was this dynamic of kind of an interior experience and also like a performative aspect of watching other people, was that like something you wanted to achieve from the beginning, or like what were
Yeah. So obviously we tried to keep it as low barrier entry as possible and try and make sure that people are not too uncomfortable. But spread across the installation, we have some games that are a little more challenging or confronting. Like there's one that asks you to wave to a stranger or cheer on someone who's passing by, and all sorts of stuff that's a little more tricky, but for the people who have the courage and just want to have a go, it's just a great way to be playful. Yeah,
we often also find that when children play with their parents or their grandparents, there's a lot of intergenerational play with our installation work. I think it's because it is quite easy to play as well. It's like low barrier to entry.
Mm-hmm.
Often, there's no technology involved either. But yeah, often when children play with their parents, the children are like the ones who would just go straight for it. They would just rush in and start playing, and then kind kind of almost like encouraging the adults to play with them.
Yeah.
While adults, then if they're by themselves, they might be a bit hesitant to play at the beginning.
Yeah. Children love it. They jump straight into it. Half the time they probably wouldn't even read the rules. They just love running around the colored lines.
Which is fine as well. Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
Like that in of itself is such a beautiful moment to see as a parent. We had one parent with their daughter. One of the games was to sing or dance to the next stop, and we recall seeing a parent take out her phone to play music so that her and her daughter could dance to the next stop, and that was really beautiful to see as well. Yeah.
So I mean, this year Now Play This is about love and about kind of emotional, I don't know, maybe the emotional core of game design. So I'm curious, like, what are some of the emotions that you're interested in exploring with this game, or that you like to see, or you wanted to avoid in this design?
Do you have any?
I remember we specifically designed a few new ones just for Now Play This and to the theme of love. And most of those were to do with interacting with strangers. But there was a particular one which I really loved, was about call or message someone who you've been thinking of. And I think for me that the emotion that I think we're trying to get is just connection with others. And I feel like we don't do that enough nowadays. We're often kind of on our phones, but we're so focused on ourselves and on social media, kind of lacking that interaction, real interaction with others.
I'd love to see someone actually go and call a friend saying, hey, I've been thinking of you but never quite had the chance to message you. And I was playing this game and it prompted me to, so it's like an excuse now. I can reach out. That would be lovely. For me, certain emotions, like obviously playfulness is one, curiosity is another. Like slowing down, noticing your environment is a big one for us. And just sort of breaking that monotonous sort of getting from point A to point B is another really big one for us. And we sort of adapt Rainbow Paths to the space and environment that it's being exhibited in, and so a lot of the time we try to relate it back to the natural or the built environment of the space as well. So we'll reference things that are nearby, like with the Rainbow Paths in London. We have a mini game about the Somerset House, the building, and like choosing two different windows to then try and playfully connect a path between each other. Other times we'll reference like sculptures in the vicinity, other buildings, statues, things like that is a common, like other common themes for Rainbow Paths as well.
Often when we do Rainbow Paths, we like to kind of just do a site visit and basically just spend like half a day there just observing things and see what pops up, and then design the games from there.
And it sounds like you're really looking also to kind of give people this experience, right? Like kind of the joy that you might have, or I know it from like my public space work, also the joy of the site visit or of like spending time in a space, discovering things, and that's kind of like translated into the people who can like access it easier, or who aren't professionally working in this field and always do this stuff.
Absolutely.
So maybe last question before we switch over, like what were some of the kind of design challenges or problems that you had to solve while working on this? I mean, it also, given that it went through so many iterations, I'm sure you've made like a bunch of discoveries along the way. What works really well?
I think I think the biggest design challenge and the biggest change since its original conception was the medium that we used. When we first started, it actually started off with just using chalk and chalk spray. We were approached to make something as part of a chalk festival initially, and so like, oh yeah, chalk spray would be a great way, and that way it can wash away and it's gone after the event. And yeah, and then it looks nice as well. It looks nice and like vivid and bright, vibrant.
But obviously that doesn't last long at all.
Yeah. So the first tricky bit was, one, it took a very, very long time. It took us two full days of installing under like a really, really hot. I can't remember how
it was
hot.
During summertime in like, Australia, which
it was like in the 30s, probably close to 40s. And yeah, it was extremely difficult to install. We actually got my younger brother to help out during the install as well.
And a few friends.
Yeah. And then the heartbreaking thing is, once we were done on day 2, we started noticing that it started to spit rain. And we're like, oh, okay. It should last in theory. Like, we've done like multiple coats. We did some material testing at home, in front of our house. We just like sprayed a couple of times and then it rained, and then it held up pretty well. And then the next morning we got a phone call from the venue saying that it had completely just vanished. Like, it was just smudged and it looked awful, and there were like footprints everywhere from people walking all over it, and we were just heartbroken. We're like, oh no.
It was a pretty big storm.
Yeah. But the great thing was, kids loved it. There's like fingerprints.
They were playing with the
fingerprints everywhere.
Yeah, and then so I guess from there we ended up doing a combination of chalk spray and tape, and we found that it was actually a lot quicker in the process, but also we also sprayed on tape that wasn't chalk, so it was just like a normal kind of like paint spray, and that held up a bit longer, and so we were able to kind of show Rainbow Pass for like a bit longer period of time. But even
and the tape that we were using was just tape that you would buy from like your local like hardware store.
Yeah, it was very DIY. Like at the very beginning when Rainbow Pass first came about, it was us kind of doing it ourselves, and it was very DIY.
Low budget.
Yeah, but in some ways there's an appeal to that. Like I feel like it's like anyone can do this, like anyone can make their own rainbow paths. And then from there, we went kind of the next step, which was using kind of designed vinyls, custom printed vinyls, and it's mainly just so that it can last longer. And we've had a few requests from councils where they wanted it installed for like a month or more.
6 months.
And so we're like, oh look, we'll have to go down the vinyls route, because there's no way our DIY tape and chalk solution would hold that long. And so it's kind of evolved into that kind of outcome.
And I imagine also there's this almost like the permission feels a little bit differently for some people who might, if they get the permission from the vinyl, it feels a little bit more authoritative, I would say, or kind of like, oh, this is a real thing I could do. Or maybe some people will just ignore the chalk. I guess it splits a little bit the audience, and like some people who are like more into street art and you just like to see something DIY, and other people are like, oh, it's an official thing, I'm gonna do this. Interesting. Cool. Maybe we can come back to that later in a little bit and switch over for now to Tim. Do you also want to start maybe just quick intro and kind of what types of play are you working on, or other forms of art?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Tim Snowden. I make games mostly in reference to dance. I was originally a dancer before I moved into games, and I'm currently finishing my PhD at RMIT exploring making dance games, which is how I came to make Triangulate.
Yeah, interesting. And was there a specific observation or a specific dance that like prompted it for you, or do you remember the moment?
Yeah, so part of my practice is that I dance with a small group of co-dancers, and we do that, and we kind of try to tease out what we were thinking about and what we were doing together when we made the choices we made when we were improvising. And so Triangulate is like one session, one sort of 20-minute block of us kind of figuring out how we wanted to arrange ourselves together that day at that time.
Interesting. So also kind of a, yeah, I'm just comparing it now already, of course, to Rainbow Paths. So it started kind of from a situation of closeness or of like bodies that are like connected more together than, of course, like the social distancing scene where Rainbow Paths was born. Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe you can also like walk us through like what a typical round of the game, how it is now, kind of could feel like for people who want to try it later.
Yeah, sure. So when people play, ideally you'll have 3 players, but you can kind of make it work with 2. But everyone pulls out their own phone, and they receive sort of 3 prompts that define where they want to kind of arrange themselves with a group of other people. And they'll kind of tell you to stand facing a particular way, and then you'll have to layer on making contact with someone else with a certain part of body, and then there'll be a third one that sort of kind of shifts it again and maybe introduces an element of movement or an element of kind of a little bit of danger, maybe kind of like balancing or kind of being held by someone else. And so you sort of slowly build up this kind of depth of connection with the group.
Nice. And the idea is that kind of you try to keep all of the prompts kind of in action at the same time, or?
Yeah, so I kind of ended up being curated a little bit when I was kind of like teasing through everything we'd done together. So that, they started with sort of just proximity and then touch. And then the third one is kind of this like, yeah, kind of thing that sort of tries to tip the first 2 on their head a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes that's motion and sometimes that's, yeah, a loss of balance or a kind of, external point of reference for your body that's not just the other people.
Mm-hmm. What were some of the like important aspects, I guess, of the experience for you when making this? Like, if there's like 1 or 2 things that you really want people to experience with this, like what would that be?
I think definitely the experience of sort of gathering with a small group of people and kind of just deciding how to be together, and using that moment to kind of really explore a different kind of proximity, a different kind of intimacy that we're not used to practicing regularly. If you're not, this is stuff that's familiar to dancers, but generally not the kind of experience of touch or closeness that most people do with just random people.
Yeah.
So it's a nice way to be. It's a nice way to connect with people.
Mm-hmm. So the kind of negotiating aspect is like not a problem for you. It's kind of like the main part of the experience.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's kind of like, taking this thing that would be an issue and kind of really saying, no, that is itself nice. That's worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is there maybe also, can you tie that to emotions?
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Because so much about what happens in kind of really intimate dance studio practice, there's so much trust that builds into that, because you're working with people that really know your body and they know how to be respectful and they know how to try something, to take risks in a way that's safe. And I think that's the thing that's kind of worth kind of trying to take out of that, trying that kind of, it's a kind of love, like, really, because you're doing this thing with other people for everyone's benefit.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine also it was like also tricky in a way to find that balance of kind of inviting and a little bit funny maybe also, and the daring or risky. Like, how did you work out kind of which prompts to use, or like what was some of the design steps that you took in designing?
The hardest bit was kind of figuring out how to kind of layer them up, because in our experience, there was no hierarchy there. It was sort of just like, fleeting moments of saying, oh, I'm just going to start trailing that person, or, oh, that's a weird shape those two people have made. I'm going to thread through it. So really it was like, I kind of had to separate things out and keep the more imaginative aspects away a little bit, let those come up later, or it kind of separately, so that just the easiest thing to do, which is to just start sort of standing next to someone, happens first. And then once you've done that easy thing, you're already in it. And so once the more complex stuff comes up, you've kind of crossed that boundary already.
Interesting. So they're not just random prompts, like they have like a specific order in how they come up.
Yeah,
Or
they're
like,
kind of grouped into their like three main categories of complexity, I would say. Because I think the hardest thing in this work, and generally in the work of working with dance stuff, is that the first response from most people is that they can't dance. That's what you'll get back if you try and invite someone to that kind of activity. And so a little bit of this is kind of like, tricking sounds a bit sinister, but kind of, I think it's like inviting them to something that feels less dance-like before the idea of dance has kind of arrived, so that you kind of just sort of skip over that hesitation and let them do the thing they already know how to do, and then let them figure out that that was dance, I think, which is kind of the aim.
Have you tried scaling it up to more people, or was there like ever like a mass session of this in some way?
Yeah, I kind of think what I think it was about 8 people I played it with, which it gets very messy, and you kind of lose the kind of consistent strands between people. But it's interesting. I keep fantasizing about just putting like 100 people in a room and seeing what happens. But I think I could imagine very quickly people would just fracture off into their own little bubbles, and it would probably look a little bit like seeing molecules form in liquid or something. I don't know.
Cool. And so this is a game that people can just also play on their phones on their own and in any kind of space. And I'm curious if you like have heard stories of people using it at different spaces, or if there's a specific type of space that you were mainly thinking about when designing this, or is it mainly relational between the people?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is that I always try to think of my work as being this thing that could just be sort of picked up by anyone in any space without me kind of being there. But the other half is that it can go back and be used to make dance again by the people I generally work with. So it was used by another collaborator of mine, Beth Lane, at through Fling Physical Theatre on their junior company, to make part of a dance work they made, Game Face, where they played a bunch of other games to sort of like generate choreographic material, which is very interesting because that's a very different use case and a very different place and a very different kind of, these are, I mean, they're youth dancers, but they're dancers. They're gung-ho about this kind of stuff. And kind of like Helen and Chad said about kids picking up rainbow paths, like they just go in there without any hesitation. So when they bring their family in, or they had like adults joining in at other parts as well, it's like, you've got this kind of youthful exuberance that's there to kind of help get the adults over that little hurdle, which I think is really nice.
Cool. Yeah, maybe we can start opening up the discussion a little bit, because like I was just thinking now, we're talking also about both games. I think you kind of touch on questions that are really political also in a way, and I'm curious if like there's kind of an explicit political interest also like behind your designs, or like a political consideration of something that you want to achieve, or something that you want to somehow prompt or inspire politically while making them. Maybe we can start with you, Tim.
Yeah, so like what's kind of, I guess, inescapable a little bit, because of so many of the people I work with are queer and think of their work and their kind of dance product as having this like fundamentally queer politics to it, that a lot of this kind of shared bodily experience is building from a kind of queer bodily literacy, which I think is a lot more interested in tearing down a lot of those boundaries and a lot of the kind of things that we might sort of block ourselves with when we try to just find something new, find some other way of being together. So there's definitely that kind of political undercurrent to all the games that I make.
Yeah, and I imagine also the kind of what you touched upon earlier, the kind of creativity and the joy of negotiating is
Yeah.
something at least that touches me a lot about this work. That just says that, hey, you know, like negotiating your body together is fun. You know,
Yeah.
it's not a drama in itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, it's up to you kind of putting
Mhm.
that in a group of people's hands to decide, rather than
Mhm.
kind of feeling that kind of come from top down.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Mhm. Yeah. How about with Rainbow Pass? Is it like, is there something maybe about the spaces that you're interested in changing there, or how do you see it politically?
Yeah, I mean, from a political lens, a lot of both Rainbow Paths, but a lot of the other stuff that we do tends to really encourage people to play in public a lot more. So playing in public is definitely probably one of the strongest sort of political lenses that we have, particularly in public sort of urban spaces where a lot of the time people don't quite feel like they own the public space and don't realize that they can play in it. A lot of the time people feel like there's like this privatization of that public space going on. And so you know, if there's like a walk path, people might not feel like they're allowed to draw on it, or you know, even something like gathering in public to play something can often feel quite political and like, are we allowed to do this? Do we need permission? But a lot of the work that we do tries to break that down and say, actually, the public belongs to the people, and like we should all just feel comfortable to play in public. Part of that is also part of that play is performative, and so it catches other people's attention, and it has like this almost viral effect. It draws attention, draws spectators to come and participate and play along as well. Yeah. Yeah.
I think also like the design of Rainbow Paths, I think we were also trying to replicate kind of like street signs, like the way we've designed the visual elements, the icons on each of those markers. It's almost like yeah, it's kind of like a cheeky take on like the street signs that you see kind of in public space, but they're all prompting you to be playful rather than doing something specific. And I think that was also, yeah, one of our inspirations as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, maybe for all of you, if there is something that you've discovered while making these games that you would like to see in more games, or that you feel like, you know, could be expanded on, or is like a thing that's underexplored in a way in games culture in general.
I mean, I guess for us, it's just embedding more games in public. I sort of wish that as game designers, or just as like citizens of a city, that we felt a bit more ownership to public space. I wish, yeah, like we could all design our own vinyls, or just come with tape and chalk and just design the heck out of public space so that it's more playful, more inviting. It's more democratic. It's like, you know, just like ownership of the space, and changing and shifting it so that it fits us a lot better. We take a lot of inspiration from the new games movement, from the 70s and 80s, and a lot of those games, they would you know, if someone was not having fun or didn't feel like they fit in, they would change the rules of the games, and it was about playing well together rather than playing to the rules, or about winning or losing. And sometimes I wish we had that attitude a bit more in real life. And so when we're experiencing public space, I wish that we could just, it's like, this thing is not working for us, let's collectively come and change it or fix it, or you know, add something to it so that it suits us better and represents us more.
Yeah, and also we've also found that just from experience, even installing stuff on the ground, even if it's temporary, like chalk or tape or whatever, we still need permits.
Yeah, a lot of
and
bureaucracy.
a lot of red tape and bureaucracy just to add anything to public space. And it's often like, it's like, oh, you know, why do we have to do this? Why do we have to pay money for a permit just to install something on the ground when, you know, shouldn't it be owned by the public? Yeah, questions like that. Yeah.
How about you, Tim?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is like just that there's so much more that we could do with the body. Like it's just kind of this endless world of kind of playing around. Like I guess I keep coming to this idea of thinking about the body itself as kind of being a playground that can and should be kind of situated more often in public. And I think Helen and Chad's work does that really well. And I think there's just so many other ways that we could all be trying to do that. And I think that's just really actually exciting to kind of think about, because, you know, we haven't found most of them yet, I imagine, you know.
Yeah, to me, it's also so interesting how kind of both works are in a way kind of reshuffling a little bit intimacy in public, or like in Rainbow Paths, I think it's interesting how suddenly you create like more intimate moments, like when you call a friend or make a more private observation in public space than you would maybe normally do, or behave in a way that you wouldn't. And kind of in Triangulate, it's almost like creating a, you know, like a public square out of 3 bodies or more, and you somehow, you know, it's not only you or it's not only 2, you know, it's like just more people to take into account and to talk about. So there's like a really interesting movement, I guess, towards each other, like to go beyond this kind of clear split, I guess, into, okay, this is like a thing that happens in private, and intimacy is always like in some room somewhere, and public is always, you know, functional and getting from A to B, and the rules are, you know, set in stone and can never be changed. So yeah, I feel like it's kind of digging at that from different angles, I guess. Yeah, so it's exciting to me. Nice. Maybe just to close it off, like, what are some of the things you're working on, or what's next for you? What are you currently working on? Maybe starting with you, Tim.
I don't even know what's next. So I'm just like wrapping up writing at the moment on the actual PhD part. So, but I mean, yeah, like more stuff with dance, more kind of more ways of like figuring out how to get the experts and the players in the same space, and kind of figuring out more kind of interesting bodily translation between different kinds of people and different kinds of bodily practices. I'm quite excited to try different things.
Nice. And Helen and Chad, how about you?
We've got probably two big projects going on right now. One is a cake making interactive experience, and the cake is virtual, but basically it's an interactive experience or a game for kids that'll be at the National Gallery of Victoria. And then the other, do you want to?
Yeah, and the another project that we're working on, which is quite different to our usual repertoire of work. It's a participatory installation about censorship. And so it's quite serious in nature, and we have been very fortunate to get some funding from the Australia Council for the Arts to do the research and development phase of this project. And yeah, because I guess the reason why we've come to decide to work on something like this is because a lot of the stuff that's happening around the world at the moment. I'm from Hong Kong, so I've also been noticing a lot of things happening back there. And yeah, so we're currently kind of in that research and development phase, working on something that is quite different to what we usually work on, which is quite lighthearted and playful. Yeah.
But we also feel very compelled to make a piece about this particular subject matter. So yeah, it's a big endeavor, and it's also, we've found, like, we've only just started, but we've found that it's very emotionally taxing as well. Just having to read and speak to people who have gone through like really serious stuff is hard.
Cool. Well, good luck on this project.
Thank you.
And on all of your projects together. Thanks so much for joining this conversation. If you're watching on YouTube, we'll also have the links to the projects in the in the notes below. And if you're at Somerset House right now, do go out onto the river terrace and play both, maybe even at the same time. I was just thinking, do some experiments. Yeah, thanks to all of you. Thanks, Tim, Helen, and Chad for joining. And yeah, see you soon.
Thanks so much.
Bye.